this building, and so I'm so proud to be here as a member of the Wagner Free Institute giving a lecture like this one. This is my first day where I'm actually giving lectures in this space, so it's an exciting thing for me. And what I'm talking about today is unearthing fossils at the end of the Earth, and the reason why I give it this title is because I'm doing field work in the Canadian high Arctic. We work on an island that is so far north that the north arrow of our compasses actually points south. So we're north of magnetic North Pole, the northernmost Canadian island. You're getting a look at our camp, one of our campsites here. My tent is actually the one all the way on the left, that yellow tent there. So here's the question that I'm asking today with you, and we'll explore it together. It's this question of how do paleontologists find fossils? It's probably the question that I get most as a paleontologist. How do we know where to go? Right? We've got this entire planet to explore. How do we know where the fossils will be? What I write is that we begin with a question. Every paleontologist will have some particular curiosity, some question that he or she is trying to answer. And for me, my big question is about how I ended up with arms and legs. How did I end up with limbs, fingers, toes, arms and legs? And what we're finding is that our arms and legs are actually descended from the fins of fish. And so I'm really interested in that transformation that took place across evolutionary time between fish fins and our limbs. So that's my question, and it guides me to a particular time period. When did that transformation take place? Turns out it took place in a particular time period called the Devonian period, so we need to look at rocks that are about 375 million years old. It also will direct us to an environment. We know that this transformation took place in freshwater rivers, streams, lakes, so we need to look at rocks that were built in that type of environment. And we know that these types of environments are building rocks, and sometimes skeletons, plants, other life forms get trapped in those rocks. Those are what may end up as fossils. Those are what we study. We use geological maps that tell us where the rocks of the particular age and from the particular environment and of the particular type are exposed at the surface of the Earth. If there's an interesting rock, but it's buried 30, 40 feet down, it's inaccessible to us. We can't dig down to that. So we're interested in where our special rocks are actually exposed at the surface, and then we go to those places. So here's a type of geological map, a pretty simple one. You're seeing North America there. You can see the United States sort of in the middle there, Mexico down at the bottom, Canada stretching up above. And these three pink circles are those areas in North America where there are rocks that formed in freshwater environments in the late Devonian period. So these are the ones that are most interesting to us. That spot of rock is right here in Pennsylvania and some of the other states close to Pennsylvania, and we're continuing to do work in Pennsylvania. I've been working on Pennsylvania fossils since I first got started in this field back when I was about 15 or 16 years old. That spot of rocks up there in Greenland is well studied by European paleontologists. So there are paleontologists that are active there. We don't need to go there and compete with them. They're doing good work, so we need to go somewhere else. And this third spot of interesting rocks is in the Canadian Arctic. And when we started doing our work there, it was virtually unexplored. The last time anyone went up there to look at rocks and look at fossils was over 100 years ago. Here's how we get there. We take twin propeller planes that can actually land on the Arctic tundra. You can see these big soft wheels. Those can land on very bumpy, rocky surfaces. They don't need a tarmac. They don't need blacktop to land on. They can land right out on the ground. And so we land close to our field sites and then take a helicopter that will actually settle us into these very narrow valleys that a plane can't land in. If we compare these vehicles that we use to get to these locations in the Arctic to those that were used by those scientists 100 years ago, this is how they were accessing these rocks. They took a ship from Norway, sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to the Canadian Arctic, and actually this took so long and they were doing such a big expedition that they spent 4 years in the Arctic. And that includes all the winters as well. They would overwinter and allow their ship to freeze into the water. And that's what you're seeing here, a winter shot of this ship named the Fram Frozen in Place. And they would hang out on that ship all winter long. Remember, in the Arctic, the sun doesn't set in the summer and it doesn't rise in the winter. So it was complete darkness and they were frozen into these ships. It's just remarkable to think about how field work was done 100 years ago. And there's another fun shot of the Fram in a winter shot frozen into the water off the shore of that island. Here's the crew of that last expedition. So we can directly compare how we do our work to the work that they were doing. We've got good information about how they were doing their work. You can see how they dressed, which is sort of interesting with jackets and vests and ties and hats and leather shoes. We certainly don't look like that when we go into the field, as you'll soon find out. I want to point out a few individuals here. This is Johan Svensson. He was the doctor on the expedition. We go out for only about 5 weeks, and we have helicopters that can pull us out of the field at a moment's notice, so we don't take a doctor with us. But back then, when they're spending multiple years out, they need a doctor there to help them if problems arise. The problem with this field crew was that the doctor actually died during that first winter. So this is, again, something that we don't worry about too much when we go into the field, but their doctor died at the end of the first winter, and so they had to spend the next 3 years without any medical attention. Yeah, exactly. That's how it ended up. This is Ove Braskerud. He was a stoker on the ship, so he was part of the ship's crew. He wasn't a scientist, and he too died on this expedition. So this was a time when you go on a field expedition, you won't necessarily come back alive, unfortunately. I wanted to highlight this individual. He's actually the second from the left, if you can kind of match the face to the gentleman second on the left. This is Per Schei. He was the geologist in the group, so he's the one whose footsteps were really following him. He was collecting rocks, he was collecting fossils, he was interested in those things. He lost a few toes on this expedition to frostbite. Again, no doctor present, so they didn't have anyone to take care of things like frostbite, so he lost toes to frostbite. This is what we look like when we go up into the field. There I am all the way on the right. I mentioned a few of these other individuals as we look at future slides, but we've got a lot of technology surrounding our bodies here. We're wearing down parkas. We wear long underwear that's actually made of recycled plastic bottles. Right? This is technology that was not available 100 years ago. And we stay very warm. You can see a lot of smiles in the bottom picture. Very few smiles in the top picture, so we're much more comfortable than the crew of the Fram. I look a little grouchy in that photo. I don't know quite why that. Bad day, maybe.
The sun is in your eyes.
Yeah, the sun was in my eyes. So this is the valley where we do a lot of our work up in the Canadian Arctic, looking for fossils. You can see that it's maybe not what you thought the Arctic might look like. It's not a lot of ice. There's not a lot of snow. We go up in the summer, so the temperatures are usually above freezing. You can see a few white spots on the hills. Those are permanent snowfields, but otherwise it's a very dry environment. Very few plants, no humans living anywhere nearby, and that makes the rocks very exposed. It's easy to find fossils in rocks that are this exposed. Plants cover rocks, people build things on rocks. With no people and no plants, it's easy to go out and look for fossils. Here's one of those twin propeller planes dropping us off, dropping all of our gear off. So you can see a few of our crew members there and a lot of our gear. And then the plane will take off and let us know, okay, a helicopter will come by and pick you up. But the plane leaves before the helicopter lands. And so there are these awkward moments, these uncomfortable moments where you're just sitting in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by your gear, with no real sense of when that helicopter's coming, if it got caught up by weather, if you're going to be rescued and taken deeper into the field. So it's an unusual feeling to get dropped off in the middle of nowhere. And here's our crew here taking a lunch break after a morning of working on the rocks. And we just look so small there, and it's easy to feel very small in an environment like this where there are no people around. There's very little life at all. And so it's just a remarkable place to do field work. Here's the next question that I want to pose, and that's, once we get there, how do we find the fossils? You look at a slide like this, and there's just so much ground to cover. Where do you go? Right? Like, how do you start that process of finding fossils? And it's actually pretty simple. We just keep our eyes open and we keep them down. We spend entire days walking with our eyes directed down. Even when we're having conversations, we keep our eyes on the ground looking for fossils. We never start digging holes until we find something at the surface. That's another question people often have is, how do you know where to start digging? Well, we don't just start digging holes hoping to find fossils. Once we find something at the surface, we use those fossils at the surface to give some hints about where we should start digging. And also we spend a lot of time in the hills. We don't spend a lot of time on flat surfaces. If you find a fossil sitting on a flat surface, it has rolled down from somewhere higher up. So what we want to do is find these fossils while they're still in the rocks, and so we have to kind of climb hills, climb up valleys. So we wouldn't want to look for fossils in the base of this valley, on the valley floor. We want to go up in those hills and try to find the fossils. So if you actually go out and look for fossils, don't spend your time on flat surfaces. Go up into the hills. That's where you'll find fossils in place. So once we find the fossils, then, how do we access them? How do we get them out of the rocks? How do we collect them? We use a lot of simple tools. We use some power tools occasionally. You'll see us using gas-powered jackhammers, but it's a lot of hand tools, the same kinds of things they would have used 100 years ago. Things like pickaxes, hammers, chisels, shovels, in order to expose the fossils once we find them. And here we're doing some of that work. You can see myself there in the middle in blue, and I've got one of these gas-powered jackhammers. On my left is Farish Jenkins. He's a professor at Harvard University. He's got another jackhammer. And then the rest of the guys, including Neil Shubin on the right from the University of Chicago, are there to help us break up the rocks and then carry them away once they're broken apart. We're digging down to a productive fossil layer that we saw in the side of the hill. There's a great shot of Brandon Kilborn on the right there with a shovel full of rocks, throwing it over his shoulder. And you can see a few guys here with shovels. We're breaking up the rocks with the jackhammer. The others are shoveling those rocks out so we can keep moving downward. And here I'm on shovel duty. That's me in blue in the middle. Another one to introduce on the right there in the red is Ted Deschler. He's a paleontologist at the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia. He's the curator of our department out there. And he's on jackhammer in that shot. Once we get to the layer that is producing these fossils, once we get down to the layer where the fossils exist, we move the big tools aside and we start working with smaller hand tools. Here you can see we're all sitting down, and now we're using things like hammers and chisels and brushes in order to expose the fossils at the surface where they exist. What we'll do is we won't pull the fossils out of the ground, and this is an important point. If we find a fossil in the rock, we don't want to pull it out because it'll start to crumble once we release it from the rock. We try to keep it in the rock, dig a trench around it, and then we want to put a plaster jacket on it. That's the kind of thing you're seeing here, and you should come up after the talk and take a look at this one, and we'll walk through the process of how to build that jacket. Here again is us just sort of 6 in a row, finding those fossils, digging trenches around. Once we have a trench dug around our lump of rock with the fossils inside of it, we use these things in order to cover the fossils, in order to build a jacket that we can then pull out of the ground. On the left, you guys all know what this is, right? That's toilet paper, just like you would use in the bathroom. We take toilet paper, we wet it, and we put it on top of the fossils. This will make sure that the plaster we put on it doesn't stick to the fossils. So the first layer is just wet toilet paper. The second layer is that plaster bandage. And you can buy bandages like this that have the plaster in them, so all you have to do is soak them, gets the plaster wet, and you can start building that plaster jacket. And you'll see some slides now of us doing just that. So here's a slide of myself and Brandon on the right, myself on the left. What you can see there is I've got a little cup of water, and I'm dipping a paintbrush into it. So I'm putting pieces of toilet paper on top of the fossils, dabbing the paintbrush in the water, and then I'm going to dab the toilet paper in place on the surface of that fossil. So that's what Brandon and I are doing there, beginning this process. I'm wearing just dishwashing gloves there, you can notice. Keeping my hands warm, however warm I can keep them. And here's a shot of a few of us building jackets. This is Ted Deschler, again from the Academy of Natural Sciences, doing that paper towel work. You can see that he's got a little dish of water there as well. And you see me sitting in the middle with some jackets surrounding me. You also get a good shot of a lot of the tools that we use, things like rock hammers, paint brushes, wood awls, whisk brooms, small sledgehammers. And these I'd like to point out. These are cushions to sit on. So they're just soft pads because we don't like spending our entire day sitting on the hard rocks. So we put these under us, we can sit on them. It just makes it a much more pleasant day of digging for rocks. I'm not using one in this photo. I think I might just be like, might be too cool to use the soft pad. Here we are again. You can see this is Josh Miller now, then of the University of Chicago on the left, and he's got one of those plaster bandages wet in his hand. He's about to apply it to the jacket that he and Ted are building. You can see myself here in the bottom right, and I've got one of those wood walls, and I'm just picking at the rock trying to build a decent trench around that jacket that I have in front of me. And another shot from above of myself with some jackets surrounding me. Once the plaster hardens and we have a good trench around this block of rock that contains fossils, what we want to do is flip this over so that we can put plaster on the bottom, right? Because the bottom is going to be exposed. So we want to cut it off, flip it over, and then put a plaster cap on the bottom. And this is a series of slides that shows that process taking place. This one here, I'm just kind of pointing, giving some direction about what we might want to do here. That's Josh Miller in the middle, Farrah Jenkins on the right.
What kind of blocks or stones?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question is about those blocks of rock that you're seeing in the bottom right. They look a lot different than some of the other rocks that you're seeing here. So those are just big blocks of resistant sandstone. So as we were digging down to this productive layer, we went through this sandstone layer that came out in these big blocks as opposed to the sort of small chips that you get in the softer rocks. Yeah.
Sandstone?
Yeah, so that's just sandstone. We're mostly working in mudstone here. But here we've all got our hands on this rock. The more hands, the better to kind of keep things stable as we flip it over.
So this was summer, you said?
This is in the summer. Yeah, you can see how much we have to bundle up, right? In the high Arctic, it's very cold. So temperatures only get up into about the 40s. It's usually, right around freezing. And the sun doesn't set, it just circles overhead. It's great for field work because you can work all day and night. You never have to go to bed. You can see we've got some of those cushions underneath the jacket because we're trying to flip it over onto a soft surface here. We've got it up on end here. And there we have it flipped over. We've still got our hands on it. I like this shot here because Farish is looking a little more animated. He's excited that it flipped over successfully. And here we are, happy to have that process complete. And I rate if the jacket doesn't fall apart, we celebrate. Because so often you'll flip a jacket over and too much of it will fall out the bottom. But here things were very successful. We got a good cut on it. We're ready now to plaster the bottom. Now this doesn't always work out, as I mentioned, and sometimes weather conditions do not help with the fossil jacket building process. You can see a giant puddle here next to this fossil jacket, and you can see Farish looking a little bit annoyed. What happened is that we had so much rain overnight that the groundwater, the water table, rose up to the point where it was drowning our fossil jacket. Now we need the plaster to dry. It's not going to dry when it's in the bottom of a puddle. So this is one that we probably left behind. This was at the very end of our field season, and unfortunately we could not rescue it. So sometimes weather does not cooperate. We do, though, build tents that help us dry these fossils out. So this is a fossil jacket drying tent. Nobody's sleeping in there. We have gas stoves running in there to keep it warm, keep it dry. We put our plaster jackets in there. You can see one right inside the flap, and it's a warm, dry environment that helps with the drying process. Nobody could sleep in there. They might not wake up in the morning because of those gas ovens, those gas stoves burning gas inside the tent. So it's not a good place for humans, but a great place to dry your fossils. And here is just a pile of fossil jackets coming in from the field. This is the research base that we all come back to at the end of the season, and then we fly out of here. You can see that bench there covered with fossil jackets. You can see some on the board behind it. And we also take these white plastic tubs up with our food, with our gear, and then we use them, fill them up with fossils, and then ship them back here to Philadelphia. I wanted to just mention 4 of the species that my lab at the Academy of Natural Sciences has described from these rocks in the Canadian Arctic. This is the first one. This is a publication that came out in 2006. Ted Deschler, first author on this one. This is Tiktaalik rose. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm interested in the fin to limb transition. This is an animal that's right there in that transition. It has fins, but it's very closely related to animals with limbs, fingers, toes, arms, and legs. You can see how it looked maybe in life in that reconstruction in the top left, and there's the fossil. I hope you can tell where the skull is there. It's got 2 eyes kind of sitting up on top of the head, nice big smiling mouth there. Beautiful fossil and very informative for these questions that we have about how fins evolutionarily transformed into things.
It's like a crocodile.
This is an animal that was described back in 2011. What you're seeing in the middle there is the big smiling face of this predatory lungfish relative. So these animals are extinct, but they have some close relatives in lungfish. So if you see that big sort of smiling mouth there, you're looking right into the mouth of this big animal. There's a great reconstruction of the animal that I found on Wikipedia. We actually had nothing to do with that, so another artist learned of the animal and drew it for us. It's kind of fun to find people being inspired by our work and our animals and drawing them for themselves. This is a third Holotychius bergmani. This one came out in 2013. The fossils are a little bit difficult to describe. If you see in the top left, you're looking side view into a skull, the snout being out towards the left tip. A little bit hard to tell. That's a lower jaw and the bottom left, so maybe a little bit easier to read. Thought the teeth would have stuck out the top. And a great reconstruction again, one that we didn't have anything to do with that we found on the internet of Holotychius bergmani. And the last one to mention is an animal that was just published 2 weeks ago today. This is Bothriolipus rex, so a brand new species out of our lab. It's the largest known species in its group. It's the largest known Bothriolipus. That's why we gave it this fun name Rex, sort of like Tyrannosaurus rex. It means king. So this is the king of Bothriolipus. You see what it looked like in life, that illustration there. Big armored aquatic animal, big fish-like animal. You can also see how big it was relative to a human and a Tyrannosaurus rex there in the illustration. And there's the fossils in the bottom right of the skull and a drawing of the skull. We've got casts of some of those fossils right here, so feel free to come up and take a look at this thick armor in this unusual armored fish of this brand new species. So the last thing I want to mention, again, something that I hope you come up and take a look at, is this jacket that we just opened up starting at 1:45 here as part of this event. We've referred to this as the mystery jacket when it was just sort of rediscovered in a cabinet here at the Wagner earlier this year. And we're still asking questions about what's inside here. What we knew before Jason Poole started opening this up was that we know who collected it. It was collected by Bill Gallagher. He's a former faculty member here at the Wagner. It was collected in 1990, so it's been sitting on a shelf for 26 years now. It was collected near the Black Hills of South Dakota, and we know that the rocks inside were late Cretaceous in age, so that's the time of dinosaurs, and the name of the rocks were the Pierre Shale. And so what we don't know yet is exactly what fossils are present here. You can come up and take a look, and we're starting to see pieces of bone here. There's a few pieces of bone sitting up at the top. We're going to continue to dig into this jacket and pull the fossils out. That's going to be happening at the Academy of Natural Sciences. We have a public preparation lab as part of Dinosaur Hall. So in the coming week, if you have the chance to come to the Academy of Natural Sciences, you'll see this jacket there. Jason will be working on it, volunteers will be working on it, and we'll be really continuing to discover what we're finding inside. So I'll close things down there and ask any questions. Does anyone have a question to ask? No.
Does there happen to be a point when you've got 5 or 6 jackets ready to go and you just have to start binge eating so they fit in the containers?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question is there a point at which we have so many jackets and not enough empty tub space to put those jackets into? And because we're taking our food out in the jackets, does that mean we have to start eating faster in order to free up space?
Yeah.
And that's never happened. But one thing that has happened that I think is related to that is we're using toilet paper to wrap the fossils, right? I mentioned that before. And sometimes when we find fossils at the surface, we'll wrap them up in toilet paper and put them in plastic bags. So we're using toilet paper for fossil wrapping, but we also use toilet paper for what we all use toilet paper for, right? So there's always this sort of thought of, what if we find so many fossils that we have to use all the toilet paper up for the fossils, right? So that's sort of the scariest thing. You know, we could leave food behind, right? We could just like burn the food and leave it behind. But this question of who deserves the toilet paper more, us or the fossil, right?
And then the other question I have is, if you had to get stranded out there during these vehicle transitions, what's the length that is the longest you can be out there before it gets concerning?
Yeah, so I think we prepare ourselves to do 2 weeks beyond our field season. So we go out, we usually are 5 weeks on the ground, but prepare for 7 because of those types of things. If it's slow to get out there or slow to come back because there's weather and the helicopters can't fly, you want to have those buffer weeks so you're not starving to death or you've run out of toilet paper or that kind of thing.
So no animals at all?
We do run into some animals. Certainly birds. We see things like plovers, sort of seabirds, that we'll see those on the shorelines. We see rabbits. We see Arctic hares there. They're rabbits bigger than you can imagine and that hop on their hind limbs like a kangaroo, which is a very strange thing. We've also run into Arctic fox. So tiny little dog-like foxes, and musk ox, which are big cow-like relatives and super hairy, right? Hair hanging off them, smell horrible. You know when there's one over the other ridge because you can smell it before you get there. And we've seen polar bear prints, but we've never encountered any polar bears, and that's a good thing. Don't want to run into any of those. All right, great guys. Thanks for coming out. I hope you enjoyed this.